Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. In Genoa City, the kind of silence that comes before an earthquake settled in just moments before Victor Newman decided to strike, because when Victor moved, he no way moved half, and this time he came fortified not with bluster or pitfalls, but with cold, ruinous evidence that would change lives ever. For weeks, Cane and Phyllis Summers had walked around city with the swagger of people who believed they were untouchable. Induced their digital trail was dropped clean and their secret alliance buried beneath layers of misdirection, burner phones, and precisely planted falsehoods. They undervalued Victor. They always did. Behind unrestricted doors at Newman Enterprises, Victor had been orchestrating a quiet but ruthless disquisition, pulling fiscal records, translated dispatches, surveillance footage, and indeed evidence from an alarmed abettor who eventually cracked under pressure. What Victor uncovered wasn't just commercial sabotage or petty vengeance, it was a web of civil crimes, line fraud, bigwig trading, illegal system breaches, falsified documents, and a coordinated attempt to manipulate requests using stolen Newman data. The substantiation was watertight, timestamped, cross-referenced, and ruinous. And Victor didn't blunder it still. He exploded it. At a packed press conference that transferred shockwaves through Genoa City, Victor stood at the tribune with the calm confidence of a man who knew the game was formally over. Journalists leaned forward as he blazoned that he'd turned over irrefragable substantiation to civil authorities, substantiation that proved Cane and Phyllis Summers had deliberately and constantly committed crimes that carried serious captivity time. Gasps gurgled through the room as Victor laid out just enough detail to make the fallout necessary: waiters traduced, finances rerouted, fake accounts traced directly back to Cane and Phyllis, and dispatches that left no room for presumptive deniability. Within hours, Genoa City was in chaos. Phones chimed continuous, social media exploded, and whispers turned into whoops as the names Cane and Phyllis came synonymous with reproach. Phyllis, blindsided but recalcitrant, tried to spin the story, averring Victor was framing her, that this was just another Newman power play, but indeed she could hear the bleakness in her own voice as civil agents closed in. Cane, on the other hand, shocked. His precisely constructed image of redemption and respectability shattered as he realized Victor hadn't just suspected, he knew. When agents arrived with clearances, there was no dramatic escape, no last nanosecond save. Cane was taken in bind, his expression a blend of rage and unbelief, as bystanders watched the fall of a man who allowed he was smarter than Victor Newman. Phyllis's arrest came shortly after, and this time, the demotion cut deeper than any public feud she'd ever survived. Flashbulbs captured her fury as she was led down, screaming that Victor would pay, that this was end over, but the earthquake in her voice betrayed her fear. Genoa City reeled as the reality sank in. Cane and Phyllis weren't just in trouble, they were going to captivity. Inside the courthouse, the substantiation spoke louder than any kick. Prosecutors laid out Victor's findings piece by piece, and indeed the defense attorneys plotted to poke holes in a case that had been erected with surgical perfection. Text dispatches revealed strategy sessions, emails showed deliberate intent, and fiscal records counterplotted the crime down to the last bone. Each disclosure was another nail in the pall. Musketeers and adversaries likewise were forced to reckon with the verity. Some felt betrayed, others vindicated, but no bone was untouched. Billy Abbott watched the proceedings with grim satisfaction, flashing back every manipulation, every taradiddle Phyllis had fed him. Jack Abbott was torn, furious at Phyllis yet mourning the woman he formerly loved, realizing too late how deep her preoccupation with power and vengeance had gone. Lily Winters plotted with clashing feelings over Cane, the father of her children, now exposed as a miscreant who had risked everything, including his family, for rapacity and pride. Victor, meanwhile, remained unmoved by the emotional wreckage. To him, this wasn't particular, it was necessary. When asked if he felt any guilt, Victor's response was chillingly simple: conduct have consequences. The judge's ruling came fleetly. Bail was denied due to flight threat and the inflexibility of the charges. The courtroom erupted as Cane cried and Kick and Phyllis broke down, the reality of captivity walls eventually crashing in. Genoa City would no way forget the sight of them being led down, their power stripped, their reports in remains. Outdoors, the megacity buzzed with enterprise about sentencing, plea deals, and whether either of them would turn on the other to save themselves. Interposers rumored that prosecutors were formally pushing for lengthy rulings, especially with Victor's cooperation icing no loose ends. As night fell, the neon lights of Genoa city flitted over a city ever changed. Victor Newman had formally again proven why he was the most dangerous man in the room, not because he cried the loudest, but because when he struck with verity, timing, and total obliteration. Cane and Phyllis Summers had played everything, and Victor held the winning hand. The sensation gurgled far beyond Genoa city, but at its core was a simple, brutal assignment: cross Victor Newman, and the consequences wouldn't just hurt, they'll destroy you. The fallout didn't end with the weighing of the holding cell doors. In fact, that sound was only the opening note of a far darker symphony that echoed through Genoa city in the days that followed. With Cane and Phyllis Summers officially behind bars, the city shifted into a strange new meter, one erected on shock, gossip, fear, and a quiet understanding that Victor Newman had formally again reset the balance of power. Morning talk shows deconstructed every frame of the arrest footage, replaying Cane's stupefied face and Phyllis's explosive rage until those images came etched into the megacity's collaborative memory. At Crimson Lights, exchanges stupid mid-sentence whenever someone new walked in, as if everyone stressed being eavesdropped, agitating the reproach that dominated every caption. Genoa city had seen downfalls ahead, but this one felt different. This wasn't a reckless mistake or a moment of passion, it was a calculated conspiracy, and Victor had exposed it with ruthless effectiveness. Inside the detention center, reality began to press down on Cane in ways no commercial boardroom ever had. The walls were Argentine, the air banal, and the sounds of distant crying reminded him that power meant nothing then. For the first time in times, there was no adjunct to smooth effects over, no supporter to make a call, no precisely drafted speech that could turn the drift. Cane replayed Victor's words over and over in his head, realizing too late that he'd undervalued not just Victor's reach, but his tolerance. Victor hadn't rushed. He'd awaited, watched, and proved every single move until the trap snapped shut. Cane's studies drifted to Lily and the kiddies, to the heritage he'd wanted to rebuild, and the crushing guilt that now accompanied the fear. He wondered if Lily would ever forgive him, or if she'd educate their children that their father's name was one to distance themselves from. Phyllis, meanwhile, refused to sit still with her studies. From the moment she was reused, she oscillated between icy countenance and stormy fury. She demanded attorneys, made pitfalls, and promised retribution, but every time she was left alone, the mask slipped. The substantiation Victor had turned over wasn't particular, it was particular. Dispatches in her own words, plans she'd compartmented with confidence and arrogance, now projected onto courtroom defenses for non-natives to anatomize. Phyllis had survived fires, hijackings, fake deaths, and public demotion, but this felt different because there was no bone differently to condemn. Deep down, she knew Victor hadn't planted the substantiation, he'd simply exposed it. And that verity scarified her further than captivity ever could. Back in Genoa city, the ripple goods continued to spread. Newman Enterprises stock surged as investors interpreted Victor's decisive action as strength, while Chancellor Winters set up itself scrabbling to assure mates and guests that Cane's crimes hadn't compromised the company beyond form. Devin Winters moved fleetly, calling exigency meetings and constituting new security protocols, determined to prove that one man's corruption wouldn't drag everyone down with him. Yet indeed, as he projected control, Devin couldn't ignore the particular sting. Cane had been family, and the treason cut deep. Lily, standing beside Devin, felt torn between wrathfulness and grief. She answered journalists' questions with grace, but every word felt like swab in an open crack. Intimately, she wondered how she'd missed the signs, how the man she formerly trusted had fallen so far, and whether loving him had made her complicit in some implied way. At the Abbott manse, feelings were just as raw. Jack Abbott paced the living room, torn between fidelity and fury as he grappled with Phyllis's arrest. No matter how important damage she'd caused, a part of him still flashed back the woman who'd formerly fought for him, believed in him, and participated his dreams. That history made the present unsupportable. Billy, on the other hand, felt no similar conflict. To him, this was justice long overdue. He'd been manipulated, prevaricated to, and used as a pawn, and seeing Phyllis eventually face consequences stirred a grim sense of confirmation. Yet indeed Billy couldn't deny the weight of it all. Genoa City thrived on drama, but watching someone's life buckle so fully left a bitter shadow. Victor Newman remained the calm center of the storm. When questioned by Nikki about whether he'd gone too far, Victor's response was unwavering. He reminded her, and anyone differently who dared question him, that Cane and Phyllis had made their choices. He hadn't forced them to commit crimes, he'd simply assured they paid for them. Still, in quieter moments, Victor reflected on the cost. Power was effective, but it was lonely. Each palm widened the gap between him and those who stressed him, indeed as it corroborated his authority. Victor accepted that trade-off without complaint. To him, order signified further than affection. As the legal process moved forward, prosecutors tensed the screws. Rumors swirled that they were offering plea deals, lighter rulings in exchange for full cooperation. The implied question hung heavy in the air: would Cane turn on Phyllis, or would Phyllis turn on Cane? Their alliance, formerly fueled by ambition and participated resentment, now faced the ultimate test. During a tense meeting room hassle, separated by glass and guarded by officers, the two locked eyes with a blend of blame and despair. Each aphorism in the other both a mate and a liability. Trust faded, replaced by survival instinct. Cane considered confessing everything, painting Phyllis as the architect. Phyllis, ever the strategist, counted whether immolating Cane might buy her a chance at early release. Love, fidelity, and participated history meant nothing compared to the ticking timepiece of sentencing. Genoa City watched, awaited, and suspected. Social divide stoned as people took sides, arguing over whether Victor was an idol or a dictator. Some praised him for guarding the megacity from corruption, others stressed what it meant when one man held so important power over everyone's fate. Yet indeed Victor's critics couldn't deny one verity: his substantiation had been real, and the crimes inarguable. In a city erected on secrets, this exposure felt nearly sanctification. The day of the primary hail arrived like a thundercloud. The courtroom filled to capacity as familiar faces took their seats, each one bearing substantiation to history in the timber. The execution's donation was grim, walking the judge through timelines, digital vestiges, and fiscal trails that left no room for mistrustfulness. Defense arguments sounded concave in comparison, reduced to oddities and emotional prayers. When the judge ruled that the case would do to trial with Cane and Phyllis held without bail, the collaborative rustle from the gallery underlined the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't a temporary reversal, it was the morning of a long, chastising road. As they were led back to their cells, Cane's shoulders drooped under the weight of remorse, while Phyllis lifted her chin in defiance, refusing to give Victor or anyone differently the satisfaction of seeing her break. But outside, sweat eroded at her. Captivity wasn't a game she could win with charm or manipulation. It was a reality she couldn't rewrite. Night settled over Genoa City, formerly more, but sleep was fugitive. The megacity buzzed with unanswered questions: how long would the rulings be, who differently might be intertwined, and whether this was truly the end, or just the morning of an indeed bigger reckoning. From his office window, Victor Newman looked out over the megacity he both defended and dominated. He knew storms were still coming, they always were. But for now, order had been restored, and a communication had been transferred loud and clear. Power, when challenged, would respond with absolute force. Cane Ashby and Phyllis Summers had learned that assignment too late, and Genoa City would no way forget the day Victor Newman unleashed the verity, and changed everything. The weeks that followed felt like Genoa City was holding its breath, suspended between expectation and dread as the legal ministry ground forward. Every courthouse step echoed with significance now, every sealed document suggested at another lemon staying to explode. Cane Ashby and Phyllis Summers sat on contrary sides of the same agony, their formerly participated ambition reduced to a cold computation of who would survive the fallout with the least damage. What had begun as a daring alliance had rotted into collective dubitation, and the prosecutors knew exactly how to exploit that fracture. One by one, they applied pressure, late-night examinations, precisely articulated suggestions about reduced rulings, subtle monuments that fidelity in captivity was a myth and time was the only currency that signified. Cane cracked first, though not intimately. In a small, windowless room, he goggled at the substantiation spread before him, each runner a memorial of how completely Victor Newman had disassembled his life. His counsel spoke vocally, explaining the figures, the times, the probability of parole if, and only if, he cooperated. Cane aloud. Of his children again, of birthdays missed and ladders watched from behind glass if he stayed silent. When the question eventually came, would he swear against Phyllis? Cane dithered, guilt and resentment warring inside him. Phyllis had been intrepid, brilliant, reckless. She'd also been the loudest voice prompting him forward when mistrustfulness crept by. In the end, survival won. Cane agreed to a limited cooperation deal, his hand shaking as he inked a document that would hang him ever. Phyllis tasted the shift nearly incontinently. Prosecutors' smiles grew sharper, their questions more pointed, as if they formerly knew her answers. When her attorney advised her that Cane was exploring his options, rage exploded inside her like a winner. Treason was a crack Phyllis had foisted on others innumerous times, but feeling it cut into her was unsupportable. She lashed out, criminating everyone, from Victor to the justice system itself of conspiring to abolish her. But beneath the fury was fear. Cane's evidence could paint her as the mastermind, the architect, the one earning the harshest judgment. For the first time in her life, Phyllis felt cornered with no egregious exit. Genoa City buzzed as rumors of a deal blurted. Lily Winters read the news online, her heart sinking with each academic caption. The idea that Cane might swear against Phyllis forced her to defy a painful verity: the man she formerly loved was willing to destroy someone differently to save himself. She tried to tell herself it was realistic, that captivity changed people, but the disappointment dallied. Devon, ever realistic, prompted Lily to concentrate on guarding the kiddies and the company, reminding her that Cane's choices were no longer her burden to carry. Still, when Lily lay awake at night, she wondered if there had been a moment, any moment, when this outgrowth could have been averted. At Newman Enterprises, Victor remained several way ahead. He'd anticipated the plea accommodations, indeed prognosticated Cane's eventual cooperation. To Victor, it was simple mortal nature. People broke when faced with real consequences. Yet indeed he had anticipated how far-reaching the impact would be. Civil investigators still expanded their inquiry, reconsidering old cases and deals that now sounded suspicious in light of Cane and Phyllis's crimes. Genoa City's nobility grew nervous, checking their digital closets for configurations that might suddenly see daylight. Victor watched it all with measured interest, knowing that fear, when controlled, was an important stabilizer. The trial date impended, and with it, the megacity's collaborative anxiety peaked. When proceedings eventually began, the courtroom converted into a stage where reports lived or failed under pledge. Cane took the stage first. His voice wavered as he described the early days of the scheme, how frustration with Victor's dominance had fueled a desire to strike back, how Phyllis's confidence and strategic mind had induced him they could outwit anyone. As he spoke, eyes across the room fixed on him with a blend of shock and commendation. Phyllis watched from the defense table, her expression undecipherable, nails digging into her triumphs as Cane detailed exchanges she'd formerly allowed. Private and safe. Each word felt like a treason concentrated on top of another. When it was Phyllis's turn, she rose with the same fierce energy that had carried her through numerous battles. She denied being the architect, framing herself as a party who'd been swept up by Cane's despair and Victor's vendetta. Her evidence was sharp, emotional, and at times conclusive, but the substantiation impended like an irremovable wall behind her. Prosecutors disassembled her narrative piece by piece, presenting dispatches in her own voice, documents she'd altered, and fiscal trails she'd tête-à-tête authorized. The courtroom held its breath as Phyllis realized the verity she could no longer overrun. Victor had destroyed her. She'd done that herself. Outside, Genoa City replied in real time. Protesters gathered, some condemning Victor's influence, others demanding harsher discipline for commercial culprits. Talk shows batted whether this marked a turning point for justice in the megacity or simply another chapter in Victor Newman's reign. Nikki watched from home, disaccorded. She knew Victor believed he was guarding their heritage, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the cost was always paid by others. When she raised her concern, Victor heeded, also reminded her that chaos thrived when boundaries weren't executed. This, to him, was enforcement. The verdict came after days of deliberation that felt like times. Shamefaced on multiple counts. The words echoed through the courtroom, final and irrevocable. Cane closed his eyes, absorbing the weight of his choices, while Phyllis strengthened, her defiance eventually cracking. Condemning was listed for an after date, but the communication was clear: captivity was no longer a possibility, it was a certainty.